Welcome to the Omni Sports Podcast. Featuring your host, Bobby Labida.
Hello and welcome in everyone to another episode of the Omni Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Bobby Labida, and we are back in person because I am back at home, which means I have my correct equipment. I do want to give a small apology before I begin. It will hopefully not affect your viewing experience or your listening experience, but my girlfriend and I just got a little kitten, and when we're separated from her, she screams bloody murder. So if you hear a kitten screaming bloody murder in the background, don't worry, she is fine. She just has separation anxiety. So I'm going to try to record this podcast as quick as I can so I can go back and give her some snuggies. But before I do, this week's sponsor for this week's episode is Staying at Home. That's right. You know what? The last week and a half, this is what I did. And this is going to sound like bragging, and I don't mean it to, because I am tired. But I went to Las Vegas for the National Bowling Tournament and for the True Amateur Tournament. So I had 3 different tournaments in 3 days. Immediately upon getting back from Vegas at 2 a.m., 3 hours later, I got on a flight to Memphis, Tennessee, where I went on a civil rights tour with my students across the South. And it was a very meaningful and awesome and very tiring experience, especially after being in Vegas for 3 days. So if I look a little worse for wear or a little out of it, that's why. And we don't got to worry. You didn't have to write in the comments like, oh, Bobby, is he okay? He's just a tired bitch. That's all it is. He's just a tired bitch. But don't worry if this week if this whole season of basketball, you've been, I don't know, out frolicking in the wilderness and now you found your way home in some sort of weird anime time travel movie that should be written. That sounds like a good movie. That'd be such a good movie. Anyway, that's beside the point. I'm going to be giving a recap, sort of setting the stage for what the last quarter of the season will look at. And we'll also look at our storylines of the week. But the meat on the bone of this episode, or the potatoes and the squash if you're vegetarian. We're all inclusive here at the Omni Sports Podcast. So yeah, let's get started.
Storylines of the week. 1.
To take a shot of this. James against Porter. Drive, spins, gets inside. It's good. It's 40,000 for LeBron James. The NBA's all-time leading scorer with another milestone as the legend of LeBron continues to grow.
Over and over, not just his impact on the game, but the league, the organizations he's played for, his teammates, and the next generation.
Our first storyline of the week is LeBronson Samuel Rufus James. Samuel and Rufus are not at all related to his name. It just felt right to give him some extra names because he had an amazing week. First, the Lakers were down by over 20 going into the fourth against the Clippers. It looked like, Lakers, what are you doing? And then LeBron shoots 5 threes in the fourth quarter and single-handedly, I think, outscores the Clippers. And the Lakers end up beating the Clippers in one of the best comebacks of the year. And I think I saw a stat like the last 700 plus games where a team was up by 20 in the fourth that they had won. But the Clippers broke that, and that was because of LeBron. And the second thing that LeBron did was he became the first player ever to score 40,000 points. And I remember 7 or 8 years ago when people were talking online, could LeBron get to 40,000? And everyone's like, that's cute. That's so cute that you think that could happen. Well, it did. And LeBron, if you consider the points he scored in the playoffs, I don't think anyone's going to come close to scoring as many points for him. Like, honestly, for a long time, until, like, I think, like, there's some medical thing that makes people playing for 20 plus years, like, possible more consistently. But what LeBron is doing is just unheard of because it's the consistency, and he's still, like, yeah, he's slowed down, but he's still an effective player. And, like, there's like 3 or 4 players who can say they've been effective at 39, let alone LeBron, who can still change the game. So LeBron, I've just been so fortunate to watch your career, and all of us have. And the fact that you're going to be having so many milestones that are just going to seem like jokes and like not real, that I'm so happy I was there to witness it, to tell everyone, yeah, LeBron Samuel Rufus James was the real deal, and had one of the best careers that we ever had the privilege of watching.
2.
Seconds left. The Cavs are out of timeouts. They have to go 94 feet. Strus from midcourt. Oh! Do you believe this?
Whoa! My goodness!
Max Strus from midcourt has won it for the Cavaliers. Strus from well behind midcourt.
Our second storyline of the week is Max Strus, who had the best game-winning shot so far of the year. It was beyond the half-court line. This was the furthest game-winning shot since Jokic decided to win it from the half-court line as well a few months ago. However, this is by far, I think, the furthest. He was still, 5-6 feet behind the half-court line, whereas Jokic's was 5 or 6 feet in front of the half-court line. And so congrats, Max, on having, it's buzzer beater season. We're getting ready for March Madness. And so, Max, congrats on having what I think is so far best buzzer beater of the season.
3.
I'm in Vegas, and Daryl called me. Daryl was like, hey, Chris, I was just calling you to, what do you say, just to make sure you wouldn't want to go to OKC. I was like, no, why? I done moved 15 people to Houston. And he was like, okay, I was just making sure. He was like, I would never trade you to somewhere you didn't want to go because you chose to come to us from the Clippers. So then I go down to Peach Jam. I'm in Atlanta at Peach Jam. And I'm at the house chilling. Next thing you know, bloop, it said that I was getting traded. And then my phone started ringing, and it was Daryl calling. Daryl was like, hey, man, it just moved so fast. I said, it's all good. I said, I just want you to tell me one thing. You said you weren't going to trade me, right, to OKC. He said, yep, I said that, but I said, that's all I need to know.
Chris Paul comes forward as the second player this year to take shots at general manager of the 76ers, Daryl Morey. Daryl Morey used to be the Houston Rockets general manager. This is how he got to know Chris Paul. And so pretty much earlier in the season, James Harden implied that Daryl Morey was a snake and that he had lied to him and that he said one thing and did the other. This was shocking because part of the reason he ended up on the Sixers was because of his connection with Daryl Morey when he was on the Houston Rockets. But Chris Paul said that Daryl said to him that he wasn't going to trade him to the Thunder, and then he did. And so here are some quotes from this podcast interview that I think are particularly damning of Daryl Morey. So my phone started ringing and it was Daryl. And so I know, and Daryl was like, hey man, it just moves so fast. And I said, it's all good. I just want you to tell me one thing. You said he wasn't going to trade me, right? And he said, yeah, but I said, that's all I needed to know. So he feels that he was lied to. And then he also said that Daryl Morey has no people skills, real talk. And so, I think this is interesting. The reason I'm bringing this up, even though it could feel like it's just gossip, is A, this is the second player of critical status to say this about him. And B, I think, Joel Embiid injury notwithstanding, if the 76ers maybe next year have another disappointing season, now that there's sort of these bad vibes related to Daryl, I could see like the team being more concerned about his perception and then maybe more likely to cut ties with him. I think he's safe currently, but if I'm Daryl Morey and 2 star players and Chris Paul and James Harden have come forward in 1 year to kind of talk about your lack of skills and the fact that you're not being honest, I think that's going to be damning in terms of like reputation long term. All right, so what we're going to be doing is looking at the standings for the Eastern Conference and Western Conference, and in reverse chronological order of those standings, we're talking about and sort of recapping the season. This is meant to be a super quick I fell off a boat and in Castaway style fashion, and I want to get caught up on what's going on the final quarter so I can be ready for basketball. That's the goal of this. So if you're going to be like, Bobby, you missed this really important thing, A, comment it below, mention it. But B is it's just meant to be sort of a quick and dirty recap. So like I said, we're going to start with the East and go to the West, and we'll work our way from the bottom to the top. So starting in the East, at the very bottom, we have the Detroit Pistons, who now, after getting their 9th win, do not have to worry about having the worst record in NBA history. So good job, Pistons. They started 2-1 and then very famously lost 28 games in a row, which is the worst losing streak in a single season by any team in any professional sport. And it was hard to watch because the Pistons looked a little better than their record indicated. It just looked like a team that couldn't put it together when it most mattered and sucked in clutch time. The Pistons traded away a lot of players. They traded away players that didn't seem like they were working. It also felt like they had a lot of players that filled similar roles, and so they were traded. So this team looks pretty different than how they did. And, you know, they've won a couple games. I wouldn't say anything exciting, but it definitely, we don't have to worry about them being historic losers. Next, you have the Washington Wizards at the same record at 9-51, which is a 150 winning percentage is absolutely brutal. Anything below, like, you know, like a third of winning your games is just kind of sad. The Washington Wizards are very disappointing. They really doesn't seem like they have much to look forward to. They have a lot of players who have big contracts they're not putting out. And I think that the Wizards are one of the probably more depressing franchises to be a fan of right now. Jordan Poole deal looks terrible. Kuzma, they haven't been able to win with anyone. And they've traded an important piece away in Daniel Gafford, which is kind of sad. And yeah, I think the Wizards are not looking in a good place. Then you have the Hornets, who are also not in a good place, but at least they're winning a few more games. They are 15-46, though they are 5-5 in their last 10. They started the year without Miles Bridges. They've moved on from some players as well. They took on in the Dallas trade. Why can't I think of his name? Grant Williams. So again, not much to write home about for this team. I don't know necessarily what their identity is going forward. You can feel a little bit better than Washington because they can at least get some W's, and I think they have some players that are better than the Wizards. Then you have the Toronto Raptors, who are 23-38. This has been a weird season for the Raptors. They've always, the last few years, since their championship, been sort of like on the apron of playoff teams where they could be in the play-in. This year, it's very clear they decided to give up on the season, and it's understandable. They traded a lot of assets away. They traded away Pascal Siakam to the Pacers. They were one of the most active teams in the whole NBA when it came to trades, which I think is important to note. And Scotty Barnes will hopefully be the face of this league. The Raptors' probably most famous moment was when their coach this year went off on a reporter after a Lakers game where the Raptors felt like they weren't getting the calls that they deserved. And when your highlight is a rant by your coach, that's typically not a good sign of a crazy successful season. But like Charlotte, they're also 5-5 in their last 10. I think this is a young team. They're finding their identity. I don't know if Darko is their permanent coach, but I see a path forward for them. Then you have the Brooklyn Nets, who are 24-36, and they are sort of on the cusp of the play-in. Just 2 games back from Atlanta, who we'll talk about in a second. The Nets, I really don't know what to do with them. The Brooklyn Nets, if you are a fan of the Brooklyn Nets, I imagine that this team has created more emotional whiplash over the last 5 years than maybe any other team to be a fan of. You went from having no one to Kevin Durant, Harden, Kyrie. Then you trade Harden for Simmons. There's hope there. And then that falls apart. Kyrie doesn't play because of vaccine stuff and other reasons, which makes Harden want to leave. Kevin Durant's just kind of like, they're Kevin Durant toenail away from winning a playoff series against the Bucks, but they lose that playoff series because Kevin Durant has the biggest freaking feet, and the Bucks go on to win, and the Nets kind of implode, and now they have nothing and no one. They have, they have a couple of nice pieces, young talent, but I don't know if that's gonna come to any fruition. So the Nets kind of feel like how they felt my whole year, where I kind of forget they're a team, and when I watch them, I'm like, oh, okay. They're all right. They're sort of stuck in purgatory. And speaking of purgatory, we have the Atlanta Hawks, who are currently in the play-in. I think this season is a great example of the benefit and terribleness of the play-in. Because when we get to the West, the play-in is going to be a really cool feature. But in the East, it's just kind of sad because you have the Hawks, who are 26 and 34, fighting against the Nets, who are 24 and 36 for that 10th seed. And then the Hawks have to play the Bulls, who are disappointing. So basically you have the 9th and 10th seed here, who are drastically worse than the top half of their conference. But when it comes to the Hawks, it's just not working. It seemed like after last year getting rid of your old coach that there was hope with the new coach, but that doesn't seem to be the case. You have DeJounte Murray, who kind of fits weirdly into this team, and it's unclear if they're able to trade him. It doesn't seem like they wanted to trade him at the deadline, but his contract is quite big for maybe his output. Then you have Trae Young, who seems disgruntled. There's no proof that he is. He hasn't said anything, but he's seen as a trade candidate to the Spurs. And if Trae Young can go to the Spurs with Victor, oh God, that's gonna be so nice. But if I'm a Hawks fan, I don't have much I'm excited about. It kind of feels like we had that Eastern Conference Finals a few years ago, and it feels like that was, so long ago. Then you have the Chicago Bulls, who are 28 and 32, and they haven't had Zach LaVine pretty much the whole season. They had him for a few games, but he's done for the season. They weren't able to trade his contract because he's done for the season, so I think that my biggest question for the Bulls is where they're going to do with Zach LaVine. DeRozan seems to be happy there. DeRozan and Kobe White together, and, there is some talent on the Bulls, but they're just injured, right? If you had Lonzo, right, or if you had, Zach LaVine, if you have both those players, I think this is a probably maybe a little above 500 team. I don't think they're necessarily going super deep in the playoffs, but they can at least, make it beyond just like falling in because of the play-in. Next, you have the Indiana Pacers, who are 34 and 28. Of the teams that are in the Eastern Conference that are probably that have a winning record, I'm most worried about them. They're 5-5 in their last 10, which for a playoff team is not exactly the stellar kind of trajectory you want. But Halliburton's not looked great all the time since he's returned for injury. I don't know if it's because of injury. That's just speculation. That just correlates when it's happened. But he's had some stinkers the last few weeks, which is disappointing because up until then he's had, he still had an amazing All-Star season. But makes me worried that the Pacers' best player could have these lows, right? Because that's a sign of, these lows could also happen in the playoffs. I don't know if there's growing issues with Siakam, even though they play different roles. So you have a new player who eats up minutes that can eat up the flow. Especially since Siakam was integrated into the offense when Halliburton was hurt. Then you have the Miami Heat, who are 34 and 26, so 2 games above the Pacers. They are 8 and 2 in their last 10, and I mean it's the Heat. They're gonna make it to the playoffs, and once they make it, who knows what's gonna happen? The Heat have had some injuries this year, but they've just kind of plodded along. They've had some good wins. They've had some bad losses, so. They, in Spo we trust. So as long as you have Jimmy Butler and Spo, I mean, I think for the Heat, Jaime Jaquez Jr. is a revelation. We got rid of Kyle Lowry. I think there's a lot of interesting pieces, and we'll see what that translates to in the playoffs. Then you have the Orlando Magic, who are maybe one of the most fun young teams. They're 35 and 26. They have a pretty good defense. They're 8 and 2 in their last 10. And, I feel like Orlando will be really good in a couple of years, but I don't know. I could see a world, depending on matchup, they can win a playoff series, but I don't see them going much further than that. But the Magic are just kind of like a good team. They always seem to play well. They have a lot of stars, and they seem to play with a lot of heart, which is nice to see. Then you have the Philadelphia Sixers, who are 35-25. And let's be real, I don't want to mince words. Their entire season is predicated on whether or not Joel Embiid comes back. If he comes back, I think they can beat anyone in the playoffs. And if he doesn't come back, I think they can lose to anyone in the playoffs. So hopefully Embiid is able to come back after the All-Star season he was having. MVP, what am I saying? Not even All-Star, MVP season he was having. Then you have the New York Knicks, who are, of the playoff teams, the worst in the last 10 at 3-7. They're 36-25. They haven't had Julius Randle for a while, and he's been a big Iron Man for the team for a long time, for many years. And the Knicks, they look like they can beat any team and lose to any team coming out of the East. So it really depends. I feel like they're very hot and cold. Jalen Brunson's been playing great this year. Josh Hart's been really good the last couple of games, getting a lot of rebounds for a guard. You had DiVincenzo, who I think is kind of fitting nicely with the Knicks. The Knicks also made a few trades this year. And the Knicks, it's a Tom Thibodeau team. They don't have a lot of depth. They play a lot of minutes with their stars, and we'll see what that translates to in the playoffs. Then you have the Cleveland Cavaliers, who were the second seed, but they've dipped down a little bit in the last week or so. They've cooled off. They're 36-21, still third in the East, and will definitely make it into the playoffs. The Cavs, they're kind of how I feel like the Orlando Magic are, except maybe like if you add a piece like Donovan Mitchell, right, where you have a lot of this young talent, but then you have that one like bona fide okay, this dude can play like an MVP if we need him to. I don't know if the Magic necessarily have that. And also, I just trust Donovan Mitchell in a playoff series because, one of my favorite playoff series of all time was when the Utah Jazz played the Denver Nuggets, and Murray and Donovan Mitchell both were putting up like 40, 50-piece games, like the whole series. And you're just like, what is happening? But I am a little worried about the Cavs in the playoffs when it comes to experience. And I'm worried that even though they're a physical team, I worry if that translates to being physical in the playoffs. Then you have the Milwaukee Bucks, who are 40-21. They're 7-3 in their last 10, and they've really picked it up the last 5 games. They've won, I think, their last 5 under Doc Rivers. And, last episode, I kind of, we talked about Doc Rivers. But again, that's not to say Doc Rivers is a terrible coach. I just don't think he's the coach that pushes you from almost a championship team to a championship team. And I feel like that's how a lot of folks feel. But they're starting to get it together. And, to be fair to Doc, any coach that takes over a team midseason, that's always going to be a tough thing. I just would want my coaches not to complain about it being a tough thing. Then you have a whole 8 games higher up, 8.5 games. You have your number 1 seed, the Boston Celtics, who are 48-12. And I think that this team is the real deal. I think they're the team that makes it out of the East, which makes me sad to say. They kind of feel like how the Nuggets did last year, where they're just so much better than the rest of the conference, you kind of forget about them. Like, when someone's so ahead in the storyline, you just kind of forget they exist because it's like almost like, oh, this is a fact that's going to happen. So, if you're a Celtics fan, you disgust me, but you should be really proud of this team. And I think this could be the year they do it. I think they have a lot more experience. They've already have a finals run under their belt. And this starting 5, I think, is the best starting 5 the Celtics have had in a long time, especially in the Jason Tatum era. All right, next we're going to talk about the Western Conference standings. I'll try to be a little faster and a little less verbose than I was for the East. But again, we're going to start at the bottom and then work our way to the top. First, you have, or I guess last, you have the San Antonio Spurs, who are 13-48. Heading up the bottom very clearly in the West. However, I think if you're a Spurs fan, there's a lot to be excited about. Wemby, he started the year good, but the steps he's taken the last, especially month, have been amazing. I think you should be really excited. The Spurs have a lot of cap space. They've been playing a lot better. They've been competitive against teams that they probably shouldn't be, which is a sign that there's hope, I think, for the future. There's some players that I don't think fit currently in the system, but I think that it makes you're doing what you can, right, in Victor's first season, and I would consider this season a success if I'm a Spurs fan. Then you have the Portland Trailblazers, who I think are going to be in purgatory for a long time. They're 17-42. They have a couple young pieces like, and Simons and things like that. But, this is a team that's reeling from the Dame trade and will be hoping that the assets they got for Dame will end up being a important cog in their machine going forward. But until those pieces are actually in the building, there's not much to look at. Then you have the Memphis Grizzlies, who this is really a lost season for them. They lost Shaw pretty much the whole season, first for suspension, then injury. They lost Steven Adams. They've been the most injured team this whole year, and despite that, they're 20-41. So despite losing so many of their best pieces, they still, they're not at the very bottom, which I think is a sign that if they had these pieces, they'd be more competitive. Then you have the Houston Rockets, who started the year pretty strong and then have kind of faded from into oblivion. I think that they're kind of a long-term experiment as well. I think there's a lot to look forward to, but I don't know when you're spending so much money on like Fred VanVleet, like he's a good player, but when you're seeking the most cap space into a player like him, I don't know if that's going to be putting you over the edge. But they have a lot to be excited about with Sengun. Then you have the Utah Jazz, who started terribly, then were the hottest team for a while, and now are not doing so great again. They're 27-34, and they're a good 6 games behind from the play-in, and it goes from Utah in the 11th seed to the Lakers in the 10th seed. So I think in the West you have very clearly the top 10 seeds and the bottom 5 seeds. I think there's really I don't think there's going to be any changes on which teams fall into these categories. Will Hardy, I think, has shown he's a really good coach for the Jazz. And if I'm a Jazz fan, I'm excited that he's my coach. I don't know how pieces work together. The roster just feels weird. There's talent, but it just feels weird. They made some trades at the deadline. We'll see how they do. They tend to be active at the deadline, and sometimes that can be a bad thing just because I think you have pieces moving a lot that maybe they don't need to. All right, then into the play-in, you have the Lakers, who are 33-29. The Lakers they're like a step below about how I feel about the Heat. Like, once they're in the playoffs, let's see, because you have LeBron and AD, and when they have no minutes restrictions and don't have to worry about back-to-backs and are playing 100%, they're a scary team. However, I don't think with Darvin Ham as the coach currently that you can... I don't think it's like you're going to have championship aspirations or Western Conference Finals aspirations again like you did last year. I think last year they played above how they were supposed to, and I don't know if they'd be able to repeat that. Then you have the Warriors, who are 32-28. They're 7-3 in their last 10. The Warriors have looked better, but they also just had one of their worst losses of the season to the Celtics, where they lost by over 50 points. So the Warriors are very hot and cold. They're very streaky. It really depends on how they're shooting a lot of the time. While Draymond's there, they have a chance. Clay's look better coming off the bench, and their young guys have had more of a chance. But I worry about the Warriors in a playoff series now, just because I do think age can be a bit of a factor more than it has been in the past. And they haven't shown anything to me that this year that makes me like, if I'm one of the top 4 teams, I'm necessarily scared about them. Then you have the Mavericks, who are 34-27. The Mavs, with Luka and Kyrie, I think they always will have a chance in terms of talent. And I think Gafford and PJ Washington trades are looking good. Gives Dallas some depth, some big men who can help. It's really a question is like, Kyrie gonna be there? He has missed a lot of games this season, but that's also kind of the Kyrie Irving story. And then you have Luka, and Luka always seems to show up in the playoffs, and when it matters, I think he really loves those moments. But again, as we're going to get into, the West is stacked, so I'm very curious to see how things shake down. Then you have the Phoenix Suns, who are 35-26. They have a lot of injuries with Bradley Beal, who's been, super in and out. Then you have, Booker, who's been injured. Durant's missed a game here or there. So the Suns, really, you worry about their depth. You don't worry about their top line talent because it's awesome, but you worry about their depth, especially in a playoff series. do they have enough bigs to deal with some of these bigger teams? I don't know / don't think so. Then you have the Sacramento Kings, who are 34-25. They don't give me the same excitement that the Kings did last year. De'Aaron Fox has been contributing more and doing like assists and steals this year because I feel like his shooting form is off and has been since his injury. I don't think he's fully been himself. Sabonis has taken another leap forward that I feel like people have not been paying attention to. Sabonis has been like amazing this year. But the Kings, again, I don't think they can get hot, but I don't know if they match up well in the West that has some of these bigger teams that we're going to talk about. Then you have the Pelicans, who are the 5th seed. They're 36-25. And the Pelicans, I think, are a really interesting team because they have experience. They have a lot of talent. They have players that seem to want to play for something bigger than themselves, but also they haven't necessarily with this group done it where they've won big, series or been like, oh my gosh, right? They went far in the in-season tournament, but again, that's the in-season tournament. So we'll see. Brandon Ingram's played well. Zion has played well. Herb Jones I like a lot. So I like the Pelicans. I just don't know. I feel they kind of feel like the odd team out where they're so good, but like I don't know if any single player pushes them over the edge. But they're a huge collection of talent. And then you have the Clippers, who are 39-20. The Clippers, they've hit a little bit of a cold patch recently. They're 5-5 in their last 10 after being one of the hottest teams. They lost to the Lakers, as we talked about earlier. And so you worry about like the Clippers psyche when things like that happen, such big losses. I don't think it's like a permanent thing, but the fact that a team this talented can do something like that should always be pause for concern. And because of this, they've fallen back. They were tied with the other 3 teams that we're going to talk about in a moment, but they are now squarely in the 4th seed. Then you have the Nuggets, who are the 3rd seed at 42-19. I don't think I have to say much. When the Nuggets want to play, they're the best team in the NBA. I really believe that. The question is, how hurt will they be? Currently, they're not hurt. And Jokic seems like he's having more fun this year, which feels like a weird thing to say. But I feel like he's really really coming into his own, and that's really fun to watch. Then you have the Timberwolves, who are the 2nd seed at 42-19. They've been at the top this whole season, and I feel like they're still being slept on. I know there's a lot of concerns about their offense in the postseason, but I think their defense being as good as it is always going to put you to have a chance. Pretty much, if you look at data from across history, in order to win a championship, you can't be a mediocre offense unless you have one of the best defense of all time. But right now you have with them one of the best defenses of all time. So I could see them going far. I am concerned, like a lot of other teams, that, how far will they go in the playoffs? But I definitely think that they can win the first round, and then it's going to really be about matchups. I kind of like them against everyone except maybe Denver, because Denver is scary. And then you have the 1 seed, the Oklahoma City Thunder, who they're such a mature young team. And I think that they will definitely win a playoff series. Beyond that, I think the Western Conference playoffs is really going to come down to matchups and who's in what seed and who makes the play-in. I think the West is so dependent on matchups, whereas I feel like the East is very much, will the Celtics, screw the pooch or not? So with that, we have a wrap up of both what it looked like for the season for all the teams and what it's going to look like going forward, and what should be a really exciting end of the season that I hope you all continue to check out. Thank you again for turning into another episode of the Omni Sports Basketball Podcast. Again, our sponsor this week is Staying at Home, so please do so. And while you're doing that, check out the other podcasts on this channel. You can also check out our YouTube channel. Our YouTube channel is currently in a state of maybe changing. Currently, what's on YouTube that's doing successful is international content, so I may break up my YouTube channels for an international division and a national division so that these basketball pods don't get lost in the periphery. So this may be the last one that I post on this particular channel before I move them over to a new channel. But without further ado, again, please keep on your radar. Join our Discord so you can pay attention to the March Madness bracket competition that we're going to have going on in a little bit, and pay attention to basketball because it's starting to get spicy. It's starting to heat up, and I hope you have another wonderful week. Thank you.